I came home early and saw my business partner leaving our house, buckling his belt. My wife was watching him from the window. I didn't make a scene. I just decided I would take everything from them. I remember the day I met Eric Thompson like it was yesterday. We were both fresh out of business school, sitting in a small coffee shop in downtown Chicago, sketching out plans on paper napkins. Dreams larger than our bank accounts. Two ambitious guys with nothing but determination and a shared vision. This could actually work, James, Eric had said, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he outlined our first business model. We just need to get that first client to take a chance on us. 10 years ago, that's all we were, dreamers. But we worked harder than anyone else. 16-hour days turned into sleepless weeks. We converted my garage into our first office. When we couldn't afford equipment, we borrowed it. When potential clients rejected us, we came back with better proposals. There was something special about those early days, the hunger, the solidarity, the absolute trust that we had each other's backs. And it paid off. Anderson and Thompson Consulting grew from a garage operation to a downtown office with 20 employees within 3 years. By year 5, we had expanded to 3 major cities. Now, a decade in, our firm was generating millions in revenue, working with Fortune 500 companies, and we had a staff of over 100 people. Success changed our lives in every way imaginable. I moved from a cramped apartment to a sprawling house in Lake Forest. I met and married Melissa, a stunning interior designer who helped furnish our corporate headquarters. She was everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, intelligent, and seemingly supportive of my demanding schedule. Eric changed too. The hungry, scrappy entrepreneur became a polished executive. He moved into an upscale downtown condo, drove Italian sports cars, and dated models and socialites. Our friendship remained strong, though. Or so I thought. The first sign something was wrong came at our company Christmas party last year. My college friend David pulled me aside after a few drinks. "Hey, James, I don't want to overstep, but, have you noticed how Eric and Melissa act around each other?" I laughed it off. They've known each other for years. They're friends. David gave me a look I now recognize as pity. "If you say so, man." I dismissed it as holiday gossip. When you're successful, people try to find cracks in your foundation. I trusted my wife. I trusted my best friend and business partner. Why wouldn't I? But then came the small inconsistencies. Melissa started attending charity events that coincidentally Eric also attended. My calls during business trips went to voicemail more frequently. Our joint accounts showed unexplained withdrawals, not huge amounts, but enough to notice. "Just redecorating the guest room," Melissa would say with a casual wave of her hand. "It's a surprise for when you're back from New York." I wanted to believe her. So I did. Then came dinner conversations where Melissa seemed to know details about business deals I hadn't mentioned to her. "How did you know about the Westfield acquisition?" I asked one night over pasta. "Oh, you must have mentioned it," she said, taking a sip of wine. "Or maybe I overheard you on the phone." The truth is, I hadn't even told Eric about that deal yet. Last Tuesday, I was supposed to be in Detroit until Thursday, meeting with a potential client. The meeting ended early, spectacularly well, in fact. We secured a $2.3 million contract. I decided to surprise Melissa and fly home early. I pulled into our driveway at 2:17 p.m. That's when I saw Eric's Maserati parked down the street, not quite out of sight, but far enough that a casual observer might miss it. Amateur move for someone supposedly so clever. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, as I watched my business partner, my supposed brother, exit my front door. His shirt was half-tucked, and he was buckling his belt as he walked. He had the satisfied smile of a man who just helped himself to something that didn't belong to him. I glanced up at the bedroom window and saw Melissa, wrapped in what appeared to be just a sheet, watching him leave. She didn't look ashamed or worried. She looked content. Like this was routine. Something cold and calculating switched on inside me. I didn't storm into the house. I didn't confront Eric in the street. I simply waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then drove away myself. They had no idea I had seen them. That night, I returned home at my expected time, greeted Melissa with a kiss, and told her all about my successful trip. She served dinner and asked all the right questions, playing the role of supportive wife perfectly. "You seem distracted," she commented as we cleared the dishes. I smiled. "Just thinking about the new client. Lots of work ahead." "You work too hard," she said, touching my shoulder. "But that's why you're so successful." I nodded, wondering if she practiced these lines in front of a mirror. Speaking of which, I need to review some contracts in the office. I retreated to my home office, locked the door, and began my research. If Eric was betraying me personally, he might be betraying me professionally too. I spent hours combing through company files, financial records, and legal documents. By 3 a.m., I had my answer. Eric had been systematically preparing to push me out of our company for at least 6 months. He'd established shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. He'd been meeting with our key clients, presumably to establish independent relationships. Most damning of all, he drafted buyout papers that would value my share of the company at less than half its worth. I almost admired his thoroughness. Almost. But he had made a critical mistake. In his arrogance, he'd forgotten one simple fact: I was the primary signatory on all our major accounts. Every important contract required my signature. Our company bylaws, which we drafted when we were still friends, gave me specific protections he couldn't circumvent. I left the house before dawn the next morning, telling Melissa I had an early meeting. Instead, I went to meet with Bernard Kaplan, a corporate attorney I'd met at a golf fundraiser years ago. "This is quite a situation," Bernard said after I laid out everything. "But you're actually in a strong position, James. If what you're showing me is accurate, he's engaged in attempted corporate theft." "I don't want to just stop him," I explained, my voice calm despite the rage simmering beneath. "I want to take everything." Bernard removed his glasses and studied me for a moment. "That's a more complex proposition. It will require discretion and timing. And it won't be cheap. Money isn't an issue." He nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained perfect normalcy. I had lunch with Eric 3 times, discussing expansion plans with the same enthusiasm as always. I complimented Melissa on her new dress. I even invited Eric over for dinner, watching them both pretend there was nothing between them while exchanging furtive glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Meanwhile, Bernard and his team worked relentlessly. We established a new holding company. We systematically transferred all valuable assets. We documented Eric's attempted corporate theft to establish legal justification for my actions. I also made a call to a private investigator, who provided me with extensive documentation of Eric and Melissa's affair, dates, times, hotel receipts, text messages they thought were deleted. The pieces were in place. I invited Eric to a meeting at our corporate headquarters on a Saturday morning, telling him I'd had a breakthrough idea for a new service offering. He arrived in casual attire, confident as always. "This better be good," he joked as we entered the conference room. I had to cancel a tea time for this. With who, I wondered. My wife, perhaps. "I think you'll find it worth your while," I replied, gesturing to the leather chair at the head of the table, his preferred seat. "Coffee?" "Black, 2 sugars. You know that." He settled in, checking his phone briefly. I poured his coffee and mine, then sat across from him. "Before we get to the new idea, there's something we need to discuss." I placed a thick folder on the table between us. "What's this?" He didn't open it, just stared at it with mild curiosity. "Open it." He flipped open the cover, his expression changing from confusion to shock as he examined the first few pages. "What the hell is this, James?" "Documentation of your attempt to steal my company." I kept my voice level. "Among other things." "Your company?" His face flushed red. "We built this together. And you tried to take it for yourself." I slid another document across the table. "As of yesterday at 5 p.m., you no longer own any part of Anderson and Thompson Consulting." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You can't do that." "I already have." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, then slid it across to him. "Check our corporate accounts." His fingers trembled slightly as he navigated through the app. I watched as the blood drained from his face when he saw the balance. "Zero." "This is illegal," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it's not. You committed corporate espionage and attempted theft. I've simply protected my assets. Bernard can explain the legal details if you'd like." I gestured to the door where Bernard now stood with 2 security guards. "You set me up." Eric's voice cracked. "No, Eric. You set yourself up." I stood and buttoned my jacket. "When you decided to betray me, professionally and personally." His eyes widened slightly. "What are you talking about?" I tossed another folder on the table. Photos spilled out, Eric and Melissa entering hotels, embracing in his car, time-stamped security footage from my own home. "You should have at least disabled the security cameras in my house," I said quietly. "Amateur mistake." He stared at the photos, speechless. "You have until Monday to clear out your office. The security team will supervise." I turned to leave, but his desperate voice stopped me. "James, wait. We can figure this out. I can explain." "Oh, I almost forgot." I turned back. "I'm keeping the Chicago client list. You can have the contacts in Detroit." "That seems fair, considering Michigan is where you told Melissa you were last month when you were actually in Cabo with her." I walked out, leaving him with Bernard and security. It wasn't until I reached my car that I allowed myself to smile. Phase 1 was complete. When I arrived home that evening, Melissa was preparing dinner, humming to herself. "Something smells good," I said, hanging up my coat. She jumped slightly. "Oh. I didn't hear you come in. Just making that pasta you like. How was your meeting with Eric?" "Productive," I replied, pouring myself a scotch. "Very illuminating." She continued chopping vegetables, her back to me. "What was the big idea you were meeting about?" "Asset redistribution." I took a sip of my drink. "By the way, we need to talk about the house." "What about it?" She turned, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. "I've decided to sell it." Her eyes widened. "Sell? But we just finished the landscaping. Why would you want to sell?" "Actually, I've already accepted an offer." I placed a document on the counter. "We close next Friday." She stared at the paper, then at me. "You can't just decide that without talking to me. This is our house." "That's where you're wrong, Melissa." I tapped the document. "It's my house. Check the deed. I purchased it before we were married. It's never been in your name." She blanched. "But, the money I spent on renovations was generously compensated by the lifestyle you've enjoyed." I finished my scotch and set down the glass. "I've arranged for a moving company to help with your things on Thursday. I suggest a hotel until you find a new place." "James, what is happening right now?" Her voice had lost its usual controlled polish. "You can't just throw me out." "I'm not throwing you out. I'm giving you 5 days' notice, which is more than you deserve." I walked toward the stairs, then paused. "Oh, and your lover has been relieved of his position at the company. He's quite unemployable now, given the circumstances." But you two can commiserate together. The pasta pot boiled over behind her, water hissing on the hot stove top. She didn't move to turn it off. You knew, she whispered. For someone having an affair, you were remarkably careless. I climbed the first step. I'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight. The next few days passed in a cold war. Melissa alternated between crying, pleading, and threatening legal action. I remained polite but unmoved. On Wednesday, she tried a new approach. She came to the guest room wearing nothing but one of my shirts, hair tousled the way she knew I liked it. James, please. We can work through this. Her voice was soft, seductive. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I looked up from my book. The mistake wasn't the affair, Melissa. It was thinking I wouldn't find out. Or perhaps thinking I wouldn't care enough to do anything about it. She sat on the edge of the bed, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. I love you, she insisted. Not him. It was just, it didn't mean anything. That almost makes it worse. I returned to my book. The movers will be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow. She left, slamming the door behind her. The following week, I received a call from Eric. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. James, please don't hang up, he said, his voice ragged. I've lost everything. My reputation is ruined. No one will hire me. That sounds like a personal problem. I'm filing for bankruptcy, he continued, desperation evident. The bank is taking my condo. My car. Everything. I remained silent, letting him suffer through the pause. We were brothers once, he finally said. Doesn't that count for anything? Brothers don't sleep with each other's wives. I fought to keep my voice neutral. Brothers don't try to steal from each other. I know. His voice broke. I know. I fucked up. But please, I'm begging you. Help me find something, somewhere. Even entry level. I'll do anything. I thought about the decade we'd spent building something together. The late nights, the early victories, the shared dreams. Send me your resume, I finally said. I'll see what I can do. The relief in his voice was palpable. Thank you. Thank you so much. This doesn't make us even, I interrupted. Not by a long shot. I hung up and stared out my office window at the Chicago skyline. The company was entirely mine now. The house had sold for a handsome profit. My life had been deconstructed and rebuilt in less than a month. So why didn't I feel better? That evening, I received a text from Melissa, my lawyer will be contacting you about the house proceeds. I almost laughed. Let her try. Everything had been legally executed. 2 days later, I was having dinner alone when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Melissa standing there, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman I'd married. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her clothing rumpled. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I stepped aside, allowing her into the apartment I was renting until I decided where to settle permanently. I'm not here to fight, she said, standing awkwardly in the living room. I need to understand. How long did you know? Long enough. She nodded slowly. And all those nights you worked late? The trips? Were you just gathering evidence? Some of them. She sat uninvited on the edge of the sofa. You were so calm. Even when you told me to leave. You never raised your voice. Would you have preferred screaming? Throwing things? I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That's not who I am. No, she whispered. You're much more dangerous than that. We sat in silence for several long moments. He's left town, she finally said. Eric. He couldn't handle it. The humiliation. I nodded, unsurprised. Did you ever love me at all? She asked. The question caught me off guard. I thought I did. Her eyes filled with tears. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for being caught, but for what I did. What we did. I didn't respond. Words seemed inadequate, either too harsh or too forgiving. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. You got what you wanted. You took everything from both of us. She looked back at me, a strange expression crossing her face. Are you happy now? The door closed behind her before I could answer. It was just as well. I wasn't sure what I would have said. I returned to the window, looking out at the city lights. I had executed my revenge perfectly. I had reclaimed what was mine and punished those who had betrayed me. By any objective measure, I had won. Yet as I stood alone in my temporary apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of relationships I'd once valued, I wondered if winning was what I had really wanted after all. My phone buzzed with a message from Bernard. Finalized the last transfer today. It's officially done. I stared at the message for a long time. It was done. I had taken everything from them, just as I'd planned. But now, in the silence of victory, I had to ask myself what I was left with, and whether it had been worth the cost.